Now, for the final coding exercise, we're actually going to jump into a previous project that we created. This is the NATO alphabet project that we created a few days ago. And it's pretty simple. All it does is it takes the data that's inside this NATO phonetic alphabet CSV, and it uses that to create a dictionary so that we have each letter as the key and the actual phonetic alphabet as the value for each of those keys. Now, if I go ahead and hit run, you can see that the entire phonetic alphabet dictionary is printed here, and this is the structure of that dictionary. Now, the next thing it asks us is to enter a word, and it takes that word and creates a new list using list comprehension that matches each of the letters to the correct phonetic alphabet. So Angela becomes Alpha November Golf Echo Lima Alpha. So you should remember all of this from creating this project a few days ago. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to update and refresh this project so that it's even better than before. Now, if you don't have access to the final project of this NATO alphabet project, then don't worry, just head over to the course resources for today's lessons and you'll find a starting file that matches what you see here precisely. Now, your job is to address a particular situation. Because we're relying on the user to enter a word, then if they enter something that is actually not in this dictionary, let's say they entered just a number 1, 2, 3, 4, then we will get a crash and we get a key error in this case. Now, what we want to happen instead is for us to enter a word and we enter something that's complete nonsense. We hit enter and it tells us that, sorry, only letters in the alphabet, please. And then it goes back to give us that same prompt again. And if we keep refusing and we keep typing numbers, then it's going to continuously give us this feedback until we actually end up typing something that contains only letters in the alphabet, and it actually generates the phonetic alphabet for us. This is the goal that we're trying to achieve, and in order to do this, you're going to have to use your skills of exception handling. Have a think about how you might achieve this, pause the video, and complete this challenge. Now that we know what we're aiming for, the next step is to actually try to get there. Now, we know that the part of the code that is prone to error or can occasionally be problematic is this line right here, because we're going through this phonetic dictionary and we're passing it a key. And that key depends entirely on what the user puts into this input. So that means if they put something that is a number and it doesn't exist inside the phonetic dictionary, that's when we get our key error. So this is the line that we want to put behind a try block, like this. And when we try out this line, and if it actually fails and we end up with an exception, then we want to catch that exception. But we want to catch the specific exception, which is the key error. Now, what do we want to do when we actually have an exception, when that key doesn't exist? Well, it means that the user entered something into the input that was not a letter from the alphabet. So we're going to give them some feedback. We're simply going to use a print statement to print, sorry, only letters in the alphabet, please. Hopefully that way they will learn and they will only write letters instead of trying to type other things like symbols or numbers. Now, if everything went well, so in the else case, then we actually want to print out the output list, because if this line succeeded, then we will have that to print out to the user. Now, the only problem here is if we run the code as it is right now, we can enter a word, so let's try something that's not a word, and we get that feedback, but our code ends. So if we want our code to repeat so that we ask the user for a word again, then we're going to have some sort of mechanism like a loop or a function. So I think in this case, the best thing to do is actually to create a function, which I'll call generate phonetic. And this function is going to contain all of this code. So in order to run this function, we of course have to call it outside of the function. So once the code runs down to here, it sees this line and it will run all the code inside this function. But what we also want to do is, if there was the case of a key error where the user typed in something wrong, then we want to give them the opportunity to type in something again. So we want to be able to run this line of code again. The easiest way of doing that is to simply call this function right here. So that way, if they typed in something wrong, we give them some feedback, and then we go to the very start of this function once again, and we get them to type in a new word using this input. And then we can see if that was valid or if it was not, and deal with that accordingly. So now when we run our code, it won't generate any errors, but instead it gives me some feedback and tells me to enter another word. So this is more of a real life implementation of error handling, making sure that we are validating and checking the user's inputs and addressing these situations ahead of time using exception handling. Now that we've taken a good look at exception handling, in the next lesson, we're going to go back to our password manager project and use the skills that we've learned to improve it even further. So for all of that and more, I'll see you on the next lesson.